A ruthless millionaire caught a poor village girl stealing scraps from his estate. His punishment was cruel. He tied her to a tree, leaving her to the mercy of the wild. But what he didn't realize was that a lone German shepherd had witnessed everything. What happened next would leave the entire town in shock. The village of Maple Grove sat on the edge of rolling green fields and towering pines, a place where time seemed to pass slowly, except in the shadow of the old Bramwell estate. The mansion, perched high above the town, was both a source of jobs and a wellspring of rumors. Its owner, Charles Bramwell, was as wealthy as he was feared, a man whose word was law, whose gaze could silence even the boldest market vendor. In Maple Grove, poverty was common, and every child knew the rules. Don't wander too close to the mansion, don't stare too long at the gates, and, above all, never cross Charles Bramwell. Yet hunger has a way of erasing caution, and for 11-year-old Eliza, hunger was a nightly visitor. Her father, once a farmhand on the estate, had lost his job when drought ruined the fields. Her mother cleaned houses in town, but wages rarely covered food and rent. So it's when Eliza crept toward the Bramwell kitchens under cover of darkness, heart pounding and stomach empty. She knew she was risking everything for a crust of bread. She moved like a shadow, slipping past the watchful eyes of the groundskeepers, careful not to startle the stray dogs that roamed the edge of the property. She wasn't alone, though she didn't know it yet. Watching from beneath a cypress tree, ears pricked and eyes sharp, was Rex, a German shepherd known to the village children as both guardian and mystery. Some said he belonged to no one. Others whispered he had once been Bramwell's prized guard dog, banished after refusing to attack a beggar years before. Eliza found her way to the kitchen window, cracked it open, and reached for the leftovers cooling on the sill. A hand snatched her wrist. Before she could scream, she was dragged inside, roughly without mercy. Charles Bramwell himself stood over her, face twisted in anger. "Thief," he spat, "you think you can steal from me and go unpunished?" His voice was a hiss, but his grip was iron. No one came to her defense. The kitchen staff averted their eyes. The groundskeeper muttered an apology and hurried away. Bramwell dragged Eliza through the garden, his rage growing with every step. When he reached an old pine at the property's edge, he produced a coarse rope from his coat and bound her wrists, tying her tightly to the trunk. "Maybe a night out here will teach you respect," he sneered, ignoring her pleas. Then he left her, alone, frightened and shivering in the chill night air. But Eliza was not truly alone. Hidden among the shrubs, Rex had seen everything. The dog's eyes flicked from the retreating figure of Bramwell to the small, trembling girl tied to the tree. A low growl rumbled in his throat, not of anger, but of resolve. Quiet as mist, he circled the tree, sniffed the rope, and nuzzled Eliza's cheek. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Please, can you help me?" Rex seemed to understand. He pawed at the knot, teeth working gently at the coarse fibers. Eliza watched in astonishment as the dog, whose loyalty was once the subject of gossip and laughter, became her only hope. Yet even as Rex tugged and chewed, danger lurked. The forest around the estate was home to wild animals, and dawn was still hours away. As the cold deepened, Eliza felt the weight of her choices and the sharp edge of despair, but Rex refused to leave. He curled beside her, his body shielding her from the worst of the wind, his eyes never leaving the path Bramwell had taken. Every so often, he would rise, sniff the air, and return to the rope, relentless in his quiet effort to free her. Unbeknownst to Eliza and Rex, something had shifted that night, a force far stronger than cruelty or fear. The fate of a girl and a dog had become entwined, and soon the village of Maple Grove would discover that sometimes the smallest acts of loyalty ignite the greatest storms. Little did anyone know, the German shepherd's silent witness would change everything. For Eliza, for Bramwell, and for an entire community. Night pressed in around the old pine tree, cold and heavy. Eliza's wrists ached from the rope, and her cheeks burned from dried tears. She tried to shift her weight, but every movement only made the cords dig deeper into her skin. The forest crackled with unfamiliar noises, an owl's low call, the scampering of a fox, the distant howl of wind through the pines. Each sound seemed to magnify her fear, making the night feel endless. But Rex was a constant. The German shepherd circled her quietly, ever alert. He seemed to sense Eliza's panic, offering comfort in the only way he knew, pressing his warm body close to hers, licking her hands when she whimpered, and working his teeth at the knot that bound her. Eliza had heard stories about Rex's loyalty and cleverness, but until now they had always seemed like fairy tales, meant to comfort hungry children before bed. Hours crawled by. Twice, the snap of twigs in the brush sent Rex into a low growl, hackles raised. Eliza, half frozen, shrank against the tree. The dog never left her side, driving away the shadows with his presence alone. At times, he would tug insistently at her sleeve, as if urging her not to give in to fear. The night's deepest cold settled just before dawn. Eliza's mind drifted between dreams and waking terror, memories of her father's strong arms, her mother's lullabies, and the hunger that drove her to the Bramwell estate. "I just wanted some bread," she whispered into the fur at Rex's neck. The dog whined softly, pressing closer, his body a small barrier against the chill. Suddenly, a new sound rose above the wind, the distant hum of a car engine on the main road. Rex's ears shot up, and his head swiveled in the direction of the noise. With a single, decisive bark, he bounded away into the undergrowth, leaving Eliza shivering and alone once more. Panic welled in her chest. Had her only friend abandoned her after all? But within minutes, Rex returned, barking with urgency. This time, he didn't come alone. The headlights of an old pickup truck glimmered through the trees, bouncing over the ruts in the lane that led to the estate's edge. The truck screeched to a halt, and a figure tumbled out. Mrs. Hawkins, the baker's wife, wrapped in a thick shawl and clutching a flashlight. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling with worry. Rex barked again, guiding her through the darkness. When the beam of light finally landed on Eliza, tired and trembling, Mrs. Hawkins gasped and hurried forward. "Dear heavens, child, what's happened to you?" Rex danced anxiously as Mrs. Hawkins worked to untie the rope. Eliza, stiff and exhausted, slumped into the woman's arms, relief flooding her limbs. Mrs. Hawkins fussed over her, checking for bruises and wrapping Eliza in her shawl. "We have to get you warm," she murmured, eyeing Rex with gratitude and awe, "and we'll have words with Mr. Bramwell, you mark me." With Rex trotting at their side, Mrs. Hawkins half-carried Eliza to the truck. She placed the girl gently on the worn bench seat and cranked up the heat. As they rattled down the lane toward the village, Eliza's story tumbled out in shivering bursts. The hunger, the rope, the cold, and most of all, the dog who had stayed by her side. By sunrise, news had spread through Maple Grove like wildfire. Neighbors gathered in the square, their faces pale with shock and anger. The baker, the grocer, and even the old schoolmaster demanded justice. The constable arrived at the Hawkins bakery, notebook in hand, as Eliza recounted every painful detail. Rex lay at her feet, head high and eyes watchful, as if daring anyone to doubt the girl's word. Word reached Charles Bramwell before the morning was out. He stormed into the village, face flushed with rage and self-importance, insisting that the girl had trespassed and deserved a lesson. But the villagers, united in their outrage, pushed back for the first time in memory. "She's just a child," Mrs. Hawkins cried. "You'd leave her for dead, all for a loaf of bread." Rex stood between Bramwell and Eliza, a silent but unmistakable guardian. For the first time, the millionaire seemed uncertain, his power, once absolute, now threatened by a community and a dog who refused to yield. As the sun climbed higher, the question hung over Maple Grove. Would the old order prevail? Or would the courage of one girl and the loyalty of one dog be enough to change everything? What no one could yet imagine was just how far Rex would go to defend Eliza, or how the truth about that night would soon unravel secrets that would shake the entire village to its core. The events of that night became the talk of every table and doorway in Maple Grove. By noon, the entire village had assembled in the square, drawn by outrage and a rare sense of unity. Eliza, bundled in a blanket beside Mrs. Hawkins and with Rex at her feet, watched as neighbors argued and comforted each other, their faces hardening with resolve. The constable tried to keep order, but Charles Bramwell's blustering only fanned the flames. "This is trespassing, plain and simple," Bramwell barked, his eyes darting to Rex with growing irritation. "If you allow children to steal, where will it end? This is my land, and she is a thief, nothing more." But this time, the villagers did not cower. Mrs. Hawkins stepped forward, fire in her voice. "And if she is a thief, it is hunger that made her one. You'd have let her freeze for a scrap of bread. What justice is that?" Other voices joined hers, Eliza's mother, trembling with fear and fury. Old Mr. Webber, who remembered the days when the Bramwell family gave bread to the poor in winter, young men and women who had once worked the estate, now emboldened to speak of past cruelties. One by one, their stories spilled out, wages withheld, threats made, the quiet misery that had gripped Maple Grove for years. In the middle of it all, Rex sat like a sentinel. When Bramwell tried to approach Eliza, the dog let out a sharp, unmistakable bark, a warning that froze the millionaire in his tracks. Rex's loyalty was no longer just a curiosity. It was a force that no one dared challenge. The constable, caught between the law and the will of the people, hesitated. He took statements from everyone present, his notebook overflowing with accounts of hardship and fear. Finally, he turned to Bramwell. "Sir, it is no crime to be hungry, and whatever your grievance, the law does not permit cruelty, especially not to a child." Bramwell sputtered, but the crowd's mood made it clear. For once, he would not have the final word. He retreated to his carriage, face pale, muttering about lawsuits and revenge. As the crowd dispersed, Mrs. Hawkins insisted Eliza and her mother stay with her. The girl was given a warm meal, her wounds cleaned, and a bed by the fire. Rex refused to leave her side, dozing with his head across her feet as if to remind her, and everyone else, that she was safe. In the days that followed, Eliza's story did not fade. The village rallied around her family, delivering food and small gifts. Children who had once envied her bravery now looked to her with a kind of awe. "You faced down Bramwell himself," they whispered. "And you had Rex." But beneath the surface, deeper questions stirred. The village priest, who had always turned a blind eye to the estate's excesses, visited Eliza and her mother. "It is time we remembered what community means," he told the congregation on Sunday, his voice echoing through the little church. "We cannot be whole while even one of our children goes hungry." Meanwhile, Rex became a hero in Maple Grove. Wherever he went, people patted his head and slipped him treats. Rumors circulated. Some said the dog had been trained to protect the helpless. Others whispered he'd chosen Eliza because he remembered his own banishment from Bramwell years ago. Eliza didn't care for legends, she just knew he was her friend. Charles Bramwell, however, did not forgive or forget. Days after the village confrontation, he returned to the estate, stewing in humiliation. Alone in his grand halls, he began plotting ways to reassert control, writing letters to lawyers, bribing local officials, and even hiring men to watch the villagers and report on anyone who crossed his land. The mood in Maple Grove grew tense once more. Shadows lengthened as villagers wondered what the old man would do next. Late one night, as rain lashed the windows of Mrs. Hawkins' cottage, Eliza woke to the sound of Rex growling at the door. A faint knock, hesitant and hurried, followed. Mrs. Hawkins opened the door to find a young stable boy from the estate, soaked and shaking. "They're coming for Rex," he whispered. "Mr. Bramwell says the dog must pay for turning the village against him. He's sending men tonight." Panic raced through Eliza's veins, but Mrs. Hawkins acted quickly. "We'll not let him be taken," she said. "He's saved enough lives for us to stand up for his—" With the villagers roused and a plan hastily formed, Eliza, Rex and the others prepared to face Bramwell's men and, for the first time, to fight for the right to protect their own. What none of them knew was that this final confrontation would not only determine Rex's fate, but would unearth secrets that would force Bramwell and the entire village to reckon with the past. The rain hammered Maple Grove as midnight approached, making the muddy lanes gleam under flickering lanterns. In Mrs. Hawkins' cottage, a small but determined group gathered. Eliza, her mother, Mrs. Hawkins herself, and several neighbors who had hurried over at the stable boy's warning. Rex prowled the small kitchen, his ears pricked and muscles tense, ready for whatever the night would bring. The plan was simple. Rex would not be left alone. They would hide him until the threat passed, and if Bramwell's men appeared, the villagers would stand together, just as they had in the square. Word spread quickly. Men and women roused from sleep, grabbing boots and coats, arriving with pitchforks, lanterns, and, above all, a sense of resolve. For the first time in living memory, the people of Maple Grove were united against the Bramwell estate. The village square, usually so quiet at night, became a hub of whispered strategy and anxious faces. The baker volunteered his cellar as a safe hiding spot for Rex, while the constable, emboldened by the crowd, pledged to protect the dog, whatever Bramwell's lawyers might threaten. Even the priest arrived, lantern in hand, blessing the gathering and reminding everyone that true justice was a matter of the heart. It wasn't long before trouble arrived. A pair of dark, shiny motorcars crawled down the main road, headlights sweeping across cottages and fences. Inside, Bramwell's hired men, burly strangers with hard eyes, prepared for confrontation. The cars stopped at the edge of the square, and the men spilled out, spreading into pairs as if to surround the heart of the village. One, taller and more vicious-looking than the rest, called out, "We're here for the dog. Step aside and there'll be no trouble." But the villagers stood their ground, forming a wall between the men and Mrs. Hawkins' cottage. The constable stepped forward, voice steady. "There will be no seizing of dogs tonight, not in my village, and not for a man's wounded pride." Tension crackled in the air. The men advanced, but each step was met with the glare of dozens of lanterns and the silent, unwavering presence of 100 villagers. Rex, hidden in the baker's cellar with Eliza, could hear the commotion through the floorboards. He pressed close to the girl, his body humming with energy, as if waiting for a signal. Suddenly, a shout echoed from the back of the crowd. The stable boy, emboldened by the moment, stepped forward, holding aloft a small leather-bound journal. "I found this in the old carriage house," he called, voice trembling but clear. "It's Mr. Bramwell's father's journal. It has the truth about what happened years ago, the truth about why Rex was banished and what was done to the workers on the estate." A ripple ran through the crowd. The tall man hesitated, glancing back at his employer's mansion as if uncertain how far to go. Mrs. Hawkins signaled to the constable, who took the journal and began to read aloud by lantern light. Inside its pages were confessions, stories of kindness and cruelty, admissions of wrongful firings, and a shocking revelation that years ago, Bramwell's father had ordered Rex to attack a hungry beggar. When Rex had refused, lying down between the beggar and his master, the old man had flown into a rage, banishing the dog and threatening any worker who showed mercy. It was a tale of pride, stubbornness, and injustice that echoed the very night they were living through. The crowd listened in stunned silence. The constable, his voice thick, closed the journal and looked at Bramwell's men. "You see, this village remembers its history, and now the truth is plain. This dog is not a menace. He's a symbol of loyalty and mercy. If anyone here lays a hand on him, they answer to all of us." The men looked at each other, then back at the village wall. The moment broke, their bravado melting in the face of united resistance and truth. Slowly, one by one, they returned to their cars, defeated by a community that had finally found its voice. As the threat faded, cheers rose. Rex was carried from the cellar, greeted with pats and laughter, Eliza clutching him tight. The rain eased, and the clouds parted just enough to let the moon shine on the square. Bramwell, watching from his window on the hill, saw the lights, heard the shouts, and realized that his power, once absolute, was gone. That night, the village did not sleep. They gathered in the square, telling stories, sharing food, and celebrating their triumph. Eliza, still shaken, leaned against Mrs. Hawkins, Rex at her feet. For the first time, she felt not just safe, but seen. The village's unity had saved her, and the truth had finally set them all free. But even as dawn broke and hope filled the air, no one could imagine how this act of defiance would ripple outward, changing not just Maple Grove, but the lives of everyone who heard the story of a poor girl, a loyal dog, and the night a village remembered its heart. The morning after the villagers' stand, Maple Grove was transformed. It wasn't just the relief from danger or the warmth of shared victory that filled the air. It was something deeper, an awakening from years of fear. Neighbors greeted each other with a new sense of camaraderie, and children played in the streets, no longer casting anxious glances toward the Bramwell estate. The old order had been broken. In the bakery, Eliza awoke to the smell of fresh bread and the gentle sound of Mrs. Hawkins humming as she worked. Rex, exhausted by the night's ordeal, slept at the foot of Eliza's bed, tail twitching in a rare dream. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting golden patterns across the worn quilt. Eliza felt safe for the first time since her father had lost his job, safe not just from Bramwell, but from the gnawing loneliness that had haunted her for so long. Outside, the village square became the heart of a spontaneous festival. People shared food and stories, laughter ringing where once only worry had lived. The constable read passages from the recovered journal to anyone who asked, each revelation confirming that their courage had brought not only justice for Eliza and Rex, but also healing for old wounds that had divided the community for generations. As news of the village's unity spread, the local newspaper sent a reporter to chronicle the events. She interviewed Eliza, Mrs. Hawkins, and even the stable boy, gathering details about the night the community stood up for one of its own. She wrote about the courage of a poor girl, the loyalty of a dog, and the redemption of a town that had been silent too long. Her story, published that weekend, traveled quickly, first to neighboring villages, then to the city, and finally across the region. Charles Bramwell, for his part, remained isolated in his mansion. The village's defiance and the exposure of his family's past left him bitter and brooding. Servants whispered of his outbursts and sleepless nights. When a delegation from the town council appeared at his gates, asking for an apology and restitution, he slammed the door in their faces. But the tides had turned, and his power was a shadow of what it once had been. Meanwhile, the villagers worked together in ways no one had thought possible. The baker organized food drives for families in need. The grocer started a fund to help those out of work. Even the schoolmaster, once known for his sternness, opened the school's doors in the evenings for children to play and learn together. The priest led prayers of gratitude for the strength they had found in unity, reminding everyone that the true wealth of a village lay not in gold or land, but in compassion and courage. For Eliza, each day was a discovery. She found herself invited to meals, games, and study circles. The shame she had carried as the thief's daughter vanished, replaced by pride in her own resilience and in the friends who had risked so much for her sake. Rex became a fixture at her side, a symbol of everything the village valued: loyalty, bravery, and the refusal to turn away from someone in need. One afternoon, as Eliza sat beneath the great oak in the square, Mrs. Hawkins joined her with a steaming mug of cocoa. "You know, child," she said, her eyes kind, "sometimes the smallest voices change the world. It just takes one person and one good dog to show the rest of us what's right." But there were more changes ahead. The city's mayor, moved by the newspaper account and pressure from neighboring towns, announced a formal inquiry into the Bramwell estate's history. A team of inspectors arrived to examine the journal, review the estate's finances, and investigate the claims of mistreatment. The inquiry brought hope for restitution, not just for Eliza and her family, but for all the villagers who had suffered under the Bramwell's rule. In the evenings, as lanterns flickered in windows and stories were told by the fire, Eliza felt a sense of belonging she had never known. The pain and humiliation of that terrible night faded, replaced by gratitude and wonder. She sometimes wondered what her life would have been if not for Rex, if not for the night when one act of cruelty became the spark for 100 acts of kindness. But just as peace seemed to settle over Maple Grove, the inspectors discovered something in the mansion's archives, a sealed letter written by Bramwell's father in his final days. The contents promised to reveal one last truth about the estate, the dog, and the destiny of the girl who had changed everything. As the village gathered to hear the letter read aloud, the air was thick with anticipation. Whatever secrets it held, Eliza knew that this time, the people of Maple Grove would face them together. The town hall was packed the evening the inspectors called everyone together. The letter, discovered in a rusted lockbox at the back of Bramwell's father's study, sat atop the council table, yellowed and sealed with the family's insignia. Children pressed close to their mothers, elders murmured among themselves, and Eliza sat in the front row beside Mrs. Hawkins and Rex, who rested his head on her lap as if he sensed the gravity of the moment. The mayor stood, clearing his throat as silence fell. "This letter," he began, "was written by Charles Bramwell's father shortly before his death. Its contents may bring closure or new beginnings, but above all, they belong to this community now." He broke the seal and began to read. The letter's tone was both confessional and remorseful. Bramwell's father wrote of his pride and regrets, the family's ascent to wealth, and the harshness with which he had ruled the estate. He recounted the infamous night he'd ordered Rex to attack the beggar at the gates, and how, when the dog had refused, he'd been overcome by shame and anger. Yet as the years passed, regret gnawed at him. "Rex was right to defy me," the letter read, the mayor's voice trembling. "No animal with a loyal heart should ever be forced to choose between kindness and obedience. I banished the dog, but in truth, I banished the best part of myself." Gasps rippled through the room as the letter continued. In its closing paragraphs, Bramwell's father issued a final wish, that, if the truth ever came to light, the estate should be used for the good of the village, not just the Bramwell family. "Let it be known that the land and its bounty are to be shared. No child should go hungry. No neighbor should suffer in silence. This is my final repentance. May you all forgive what I could not undo." For a long moment, no one spoke. Charles Bramwell, seated in the back, looked ashen and defeated. The villagers absorbed the words, feeling their pain and anger shift into something softer, an understanding of the power of truth and the possibility of healing. The mayor folded the letter and faced the crowd. "You all heard it. The Bramwell estate is no longer the domain of one man, but a trust for all Maple Grove. There will be a committee to manage the land, provide for those in need, and ensure no one suffers, as Eliza and her family have. This is the beginning of a new chapter." Cheers erupted, mixed with tears and hugs. The children danced in the aisles, and old quarrels were forgotten as neighbors promised to work together for the good of all. Eliza was surrounded by friends and strangers alike, each offering congratulations, apologies, and thanks. Charles Bramwell sat for a long time after the hall emptied, staring at the letter. At last, he stood, shoulders stooped, and approached Eliza and Mrs. Hawkins. His voice was rough but sincere. "I can't undo what I did. I'm sorry, Eliza, for everything." The girl nodded, not out of forgiveness, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had endured and overcome. Mrs. Hawkins spoke for them both. "It's not too late to do good. Start by honoring your father's wish." In the weeks that followed, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The Bramwell lands were parceled out to local farmers. The mansion's unused rooms became a school and a hospital. Food stores were opened for those in need, and every family found work, dignity, and hope where there had once been only fear. Rex became the mascot of the new Maple Grove, a living reminder that loyalty and kindness can change the world. The dog spent his days wandering the fields, always returning to Eliza at sunset for a quiet walk home. The story of the poor girl, the millionaire, and the loyal German shepherd became legend, taught in schools and recounted at festivals, a reminder that even the cruelest injustice can be overcome by courage, truth, and community. Eliza's family prospered, her mother given work at the new community center, and her father returning to farming, no longer afraid of the future. Eliza herself became a symbol of hope, her resilience and bravery celebrated by all who knew her. Yet as the first harvest was gathered under the new order, the villagers knew that the work of healing would go on. Scars ran deep, and forgiveness would take time. But the path had been cleared, and together, Maple Grove stepped into the light of a future shaped not by fear, but by the kindness and unity of all its people. The first months under the new order were filled with a cautious but growing optimism. Maple Grove, once a village divided by fear and class, slowly knit itself back together. Neighbors who had rarely spoken before now shared work, meals, and laughter, rediscovering the joys of community life. The mansion, stripped of its former coldness, bustled with new energy. Classrooms rang with the voices of children who had once wandered hungry. The old ballroom echoed with the footfalls of nurses, teachers, and volunteers. Eliza thrived in this new world. Her days were busy. She attended school in the mornings, helped her mother in the gardens, and spent her afternoons reading by the river or tending to the animals the village had adopted as their own. Rex was always at her side, his keen eyes and gentle presence a source of comfort for everyone. Children would call to him, and he'd bound over for a pat, always keeping an ear tuned for Eliza's voice. The village council, formed by elected representatives from every family, met regularly in the once forbidding Bramwell Library. There, they planned harvests, organized lessons, and debated how best to use the estate's resources. The council's decisions were posted each week on the old iron gates, now left open for all to read. Transparency replaced secrets, and the sense of shared responsibility grew. One afternoon, a traveling journalist arrived to write a follow-up story about Maple Grove's transformation. She interviewed Eliza, who told her how the worst night of her life had become the turning point for everyone she knew. "I used to be afraid all the time," Eliza confessed, "but Rex was never afraid. Not when I was tied to the tree, not when Bramwell's men came. He believed in me, and that made me believe in myself. I think that's what changed things." The journalist spent a week in the village, eating at the communal table and joining in the evening storytelling by the fire. She witnessed the ease with which former rivals worked side by side in the fields and the pride the children took in their lessons and chores. Her article, published in a major newspaper, brought more attention and visitors, and donations that helped repair roads, buy new books, and hire a doctor for the first time in years. Meanwhile, Charles Bramwell became a changed man. The bitterness that had ruled his life began to dissolve as he saw what his family's estate had become. He started volunteering at the school, reading to the children and helping tend the gardens. He was often seen walking the fields with Eliza's father, listening and learning from a man he once dismissed. The village never forgot his past, but slowly, respect replaced resentment. True redemption, they realized, was not in forgetting, but in making amends. Rex remained the village's quiet hero. On the anniversary of the night Eliza was tied to the tree, the villagers held a festival in the square. Lanterns floated into the sky, each one carrying a wish or a prayer. Eliza led Rex to the oak tree at the center of town, laying a garland of wildflowers around his neck. The priest offered a blessing, and children recited a poem they'd written about loyalty, courage, and hope. Tears shone in many eyes as Eliza hugged her friend, whispering thanks for 1,000 silent acts of kindness. With each season, Maple Grove grew stronger. New families arrived, drawn by tales of the village's rebirth. The school flourished, the harvests were bountiful, and every voice was heard at the council. Old wounds faded, replaced by a new sense of belonging and pride. But Eliza knew the story was not just hers, nor Rex's, nor even Maple Grove's. It was a story for anyone who had ever been afraid or hungry or alone. It was a promise that even the smallest act of courage could change the world, and that, sometimes, the loyalty of a single good friend could bring a whole community back to life. With time, Maple Grove's transformation drew visitors from farther afield, scholars, philanthropists, and curious strangers who wanted to see for themselves the village that had turned injustice into renewal. Some arrived with skepticism, expecting to find the old divisions and resentments, but instead they discovered a place where forgiveness had become a daily habit and where hope was as practical as bread. Eliza grew in confidence, her quick mind and kind heart recognized by teachers and neighbors alike. She and Rex became inseparable icons, the girl who faced cruelty with dignity and the dog who refused to leave her side. The two were welcomed at every table, and their story was shared with each new guest. People marveled at Rex's loyalty, noting the way he seemed to understand everyone's worries, whether sitting quietly with an anxious child or patrolling the fields during the first storms of spring. One particular visitor, an educator from the city, stayed for several weeks to observe the new school system. She brought books, games, and fresh ideas. She noticed how children no longer competed for scraps, but instead helped each other learn and grow. When a child struggled, others would volunteer to explain, to share, or to simply listen, echoing the compassion that had saved Eliza in her darkest hour. During the educator's stay, the village council invited everyone to a meeting in the old ballroom. The topic, how to ensure Maple Grove's newfound unity and justice would endure for generations. After much discussion, they decided to create an annual Day of Courage and Kindness, a time to honor acts of bravery, big and small, and to retell the stories that shaped them. The first celebration was a joyful event. The entire village gathered in the square, lanterns and ribbons strung between trees, tables laden with food. The educator presented Eliza with a book of fairy tales, inscribed with the words, "To the bravest heart I've ever met." The children staged a play about the night Rex saved Eliza, complete with makeshift costumes and exaggerated growls. Laughter and applause rang out as Rex, wearing his garland, accepted his role with gentle dignity. But even in celebration, life reminded them that courage would always be needed. One afternoon, while helping in the fields, Eliza spotted a group of travelers stranded on the muddy road outside the village. Without hesitation, she called for help, organizing a team to pull the cart free and bring the strangers back for a meal and shelter. The travelers, grateful and humbled, shared news of hardships elsewhere, villages where hunger still ruled, where the powerful still used fear to keep people apart. That evening, after the guests had departed, Eliza lay awake, thinking about all the places that had not yet found their courage. "We're lucky, Rex," she whispered, stroking his fur. "But I wish everyone could have what we have now." Rex thumped his tail as if agreeing. Inspired, Eliza and her friends started a letter-writing project, sharing Maple Grove's story with children in other towns. They sent seeds from the community gardens, recipes for simple meals, and tales of how the village had changed. Replies came in slowly at first, but soon children from distant places wrote back, sharing their own struggles and victories. The ripple effect was unmistakable. Neighboring villages began to experiment with their own councils, food drives, and festivals. Maple Grove became a symbol, not just of one night's courage, but of the quiet, determined kindness that could change a life, a family, and, in time, a whole world. As summer ripened and the fields turned gold, Eliza's days were full. She helped organize the next festival, learned to read music, and took long walks with Rex, who seemed to enjoy every moment of their new life. Sometimes on those walks, she would find herself by the old oak tree, tracing the rough bark where she had once been tied. She would pause, take a deep breath, and remember not the pain, but the love and loyalty that had saved her. In those moments, Eliza knew that no matter what challenges the future brought, Maple Grove was ready. They had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to stand together, again and again, until justice, kindness, and hope became the village's truest inheritance. As the second year of Maple Grove's rebirth unfolded, the village's story continued to ripple outward, shaping lives in ways both visible and hidden. Letters arrived weekly from faraway towns, some seeking advice, others sending thanks. Small gestures inspired by Eliza and Rex began to multiply. Meals shared, feuds reconciled, lost animals found and returned to their homes. It seemed that the tale of a girl, a dog, and a courageous village had struck a universal chord. Maple Grove itself flourished. The gardens, once neglected, overflowed with vegetables and flowers, tended by hands both young and old. The school's walls filled with drawings of the village's transformation. Children depicted themselves as helpers and heroes, with Rex always at their side, tail high and eyes bright. The mansion-turned community center became the heart of every celebration and meeting, a place where every voice was heard, regardless of background or wealth. For Eliza, life became a mosaic of new experiences and responsibilities. She excelled in her studies, but also took pride in the daily tasks that kept the village thriving: harvesting potatoes, mending fences, teaching younger children to read. She was no longer just the poor girl, but a leader and friend, her quiet bravery setting an example even for adults. Rex remained her shadow, trotting beside her through fields and lanes, his protective presence a comfort to all. The council recognized Eliza's natural leadership. They invited her to participate in planning for the coming winter, a challenge that required wisdom and foresight. She proposed the idea of a sharing store, a place where surplus food, warm clothes, and other necessities could be freely taken and given by anyone. The villagers embraced the plan, and soon the old barn was transformed into a bustling hub of generosity. Even Charles Bramwell, changed by the events of the past year, contributed seed money and his time, helping to organize the shelves. The sharing store became a source of pride. It ensured that no family went cold or hungry, and it encouraged the habit of asking for help without shame. The store's simple rules, take what you need, give what you can, became the village's new creed. But even as the village prospered, tests of their unity arose. Early frost damaged a third of the crops, and an illness swept through the livestock. For a moment, old fears resurfaced, and voices of doubt murmured in corners. Yet, instead of splintering, the villagers rallied. The council, led by Eliza's calm logic and the constable's steady hand, organized work parties to replant, care for the sick animals, and support families hit hardest by loss. One cold evening, as Eliza walked home after a long day at the barn, she found Rex standing at the edge of the woods, nose to the wind. The dog let out a low, questioning bark. Eliza followed his gaze and spotted a pair of strangers, tired, thin, and wary, emerging from the trees. She recognized the look in their eyes: hunger, shame, and hope. Without hesitation, Eliza called to them. "Come in! There's food, warmth, and friends here." Rex trotted forward, tail wagging, breaking the tension with his gentle confidence. The strangers, refugees from a village struck by disaster, were welcomed with open arms. Their arrival reminded everyone of Maple Grove's own journey and reinforced the belief that compassion, not suspicion, must be the first response to need. Through the hardships and the triumphs, Eliza grew in wisdom. She learned that true leadership was not about command, but about listening, forgiving, and inspiring others to give their best. The village, too, matured. Forgiveness extended not only to those who had wronged them, but to themselves for the years spent in silence or fear. Rex, older now but no less vigilant, became the symbol of that spirit. At every council, festival, and work party, he watched over the proceedings, his calm presence a living reminder of what loyalty and courage had achieved. And as the seasons turned, Maple Grove settled into a new rhythm, one that balanced hope with humility, ambition with gratitude. The villagers no longer feared what the future might bring, because they knew they would face it together, with open hearts and steady hands. Yet as Eliza sat by the fire with her family and Rex at her feet, she sensed there was still more to come. Life, she'd learned, always brought fresh challenges, and with them, new chances to choose kindness, to stand for what was right, and to let the light of one brave act spread until it touched the lives of everyone, near and far. The first snow of winter arrived early, blanketing Maple Grove in a hush that seemed to draw the village closer together. Smoke curled from every chimney, and the scent of baking bread and roasting root vegetables filled the air. The villagers had worked tirelessly all autumn, storing food and mending houses, and now reaped the rewards of their cooperation. Yet the winter's beauty masked new challenges. The early freeze made travel difficult, isolating families on the outskirts. Some livestock succumbed to the cold, and a bad case of flu spread through several homes. The sharing store became a lifeline, its shelves stocked with preserved fruits, blankets, and remedies donated by every household. Eliza found herself spending long evenings there, tending the fire and comforting those who arrived shivering and anxious. Through it all, Rex remained her steadfast companion. He would nudge her awake before dawn, eager to join the day's work, delivering soup to sick neighbors, herding stray sheep back to shelter, greeting children with his wagging tail and patient eyes. He became, in many ways, the village's silent guardian. When Eliza walked the lanes after dark, Rex was always at her side, his presence enough to chase away fear. One stormy night, a frantic knocking brought Eliza and her mother to the door. Mrs. Watts, the widow who lived alone at the edge of the woods, stood in the snow clutching her side. "Please, my roof has caved in, and I can't keep warm. I tried to start a fire, but it smoked me out." Eliza wasted no time. She bundled the woman in blankets, called to Rex, and set off with lantern and sled for Mrs. Watts's cottage. Together, they navigated drifts and howling wind. When they arrived, the old woman's house was cold and dark. But Rex went in first, sniffing out danger and settling himself by the hearth to encourage the others. Eliza and her mother built a quick fire, then worked to patch the roof with tarps and spare wood, their breath fogging in the chilly air. Mrs. Watts, weak but grateful, squeezed Eliza's hand. "You're braver than any grown man, child," she whispered. "You and that good dog." Word of the rescue spread by morning. Inspired, the villagers organized themselves into crews to check on every home, sharing supplies, repairing roofs, and making sure no one was left to face the winter alone. Old divisions seemed smaller than ever, and even the most reclusive neighbors accepted help, pride softened by gratitude. As the weeks passed, Maple Grove's resilience was tested again and again, but never broken. Illness faded, thanks to shared medicine and care. The winter's grip loosened with each act of kindness, each loaf of bread left at a door, each note of encouragement tucked into a borrowed book. The sharing store never ran out of essentials, and the council met by lamplight to plan for spring. Optimistic, resourceful, united. Through it all, Eliza found herself growing not just in skill and courage, but in spirit. She learned the art of mending and the strength of patience, the joy of teaching younger children to read, and the satisfaction of solving problems with friends old and new. And she learned the deepest lesson of all, that even when the world seemed cold and unforgiving, warmth could always be found in the loyalty of those who cared. Rex, now with a touch of grey in his muzzle, was honored at the second annual Day of Courage and Kindness. The villagers fashioned a medal for him, a simple wooden disc engraved with the words "For Loyalty and Bravery," and fastened it to his collar in a ceremony filled with laughter and tears. Eliza knelt beside him as the village cheered, her heart full of love and pride. Looking out over the gathered faces, Eliza understood that the story of a poor girl and a loyal dog had become Maple Grove's story too, a story that proved, time and again, that no one is ever truly alone if they are willing to stand together. Yet, as the snow slowly melted and the first birds returned, Eliza knew there were still chapters left to write. The seasons would turn, new challenges would come, and the spirit of courage and kindness that had saved Maple Grove would be needed once more. But now, whatever the future held, she faced it with hope, and with Rex faithfully by her side. With the thaw of early spring, Maple Grove seemed to burst back to life. The villagers gathered in muddy lanes to repair fences, plant the first rows of potatoes, and clean the community center for a new season of lessons and celebrations. The hardships of winter faded into memories, replaced by the satisfaction of survival and the promise of new beginnings. Eliza felt the change most acutely. She had grown taller, her cheeks rosy from the cold, and her steps light with anticipation for the days ahead. Rex was never far, sometimes leading the children on adventures through the budding woods, other times sitting patiently at Eliza's side while she read stories to the younger ones under the old oak tree. The medal he wore clinked softly when he ran, a constant reminder of all they had endured together. The council, energized by the village's resilience, launched new initiatives. They built beehives to pollinate the orchards, organized a market for neighboring towns, and welcomed traveling merchants and artisans. The sharing store was expanded and painted with bright murals, children's handprints in every color, scenes of fields and forests, and always Rex at the center, his tail curling in a joyful arc. Charles Bramwell, a quieter presence now, worked diligently with the other farmers. His willingness to listen and his efforts to support the new order earned cautious respect. He helped repair a collapsed bridge with Eliza's father, sharing stories of his youth and in for the first time, laughing at his own mistakes. Though some old wounds healed slowly, there was a sense that time and effort could build bridges just as surely as hands and wood. That spring, Eliza and her friends dreamed up a new project, a festival for all the villages along the valley. They wrote invitations, decorated wagons, and rehearsed songs and dances. The council agreed, seeing in the idea a chance to spread Maple Grove's message of courage and kindness beyond its borders. The festival day dawned bright and breezy. Guests arrived from miles around, some on foot, others in carts filled with cheese, apples, or woven goods. Laughter echoed as children played games in the fields, and music drifted from the porch of the old mansion. The main square became a stage, and Eliza, dressed in her best dress, was asked to tell the story of that terrible, transformative night when Rex had watched over her. She spoke simply, voice clear and strong. "I was afraid. I thought I was alone, but I wasn't. My family, my friends, and Rex, they showed me that help comes when you least expect it, and that a village is just a family you build for yourself. We all have the power to change things, one kind act at a time." The audience fell silent, many wiping their eyes. At the story's end, Eliza invited the youngest children to join her on stage, each holding a small lantern. Together, they led a procession around the square. The lanterns, a chain of light linking every heart. That night, after the festival wound down and the guests departed, the village gathered in the warmth of the community center. Songs and laughter lingered in the candlelight. Eliza sat beside Rex, stroking his ears as the council talked of plans for next year's crops and repairs. As the stars emerged, Charles Bramwell stood to address the room. "We once let pride and fear rule us," he said. "But now, thanks to the courage of a child, the loyalty of a dog, and the strength of this village, we have learned a better way. I am grateful, and I am changed." Applause swept the room. Old hatreds felt distant, replaced by gratitude and hope. Later, walking home through the cool spring air, Eliza paused beneath the same tree where she'd been tied all those months ago. She pressed her hand to its rough bark and whispered a quiet promise to never let anyone feel as alone or frightened as she once had. Rex bumped her knee with his nose, as if reminding her that, whatever came, they would face it together. The moon rose over Maple Grove, bathing the fields and cottages in silver. It was a new season, full of possibility, and the story of a poor girl, a village, and a loyal German shepherd was still unfolding, one brave, kind day at a time. Spring deepened, and with it, Maple Grove's spirit continued to flourish. The days grew warmer, wildflowers unfurled across the meadows, and laughter seemed to fill every corner of the village. Children played from dawn till dusk, inventing games among the orchards, racing along the riverbanks, and weaving daisy crowns for each other, and for Rex, who wore them with quiet dignity. Eliza found her life richer than she could have ever dreamed. She excelled in her studies and became a mentor to younger children, teaching them not just to read and write, but to listen and care. She led by example, tending the communal gardens, helping elders carry firewood, and visiting neighbors who needed company. More than once, she found herself comforting a friend through hardship, her own story proof that no struggle was too great to overcome. The sharing store grew busier as word spread to neighboring villages. New faces appeared each week, families fleeing hardship, children orphaned by illness, workers seeking new beginnings. Maple Grove welcomed them with open arms, teaching them the rhythms of the fields and the principles of trust and giving. The community grew more diverse, and with each new member, the fabric of village life became stronger. Rex, beloved by all, seemed to understand that his role was bigger than guarding Eliza. He spent his days visiting every corner of the village, escorting the smallest children to school, accompanying the elderly on their walks, even chasing away the occasional fox from the chicken coops. He slept most nights at the foot of Eliza's bed, but some evenings he'd disappear for hours, only to return with muddy paws and a satisfied grin, as if he'd been checking on each soul in need of comfort. With summer approaching, the village prepared for its next great project, building a bridge over the river to connect Maple Grove to the next settlement. It was a bold undertaking, one that required cooperation, planning, and no small measure of courage. Eliza was elected to the organizing committee, her ideas and optimism inspiring both children and adults. She suggested that the bridge bear a plaque, inscribed not with a single name, but with the village's motto, "No one stands alone." Construction began with a festival, dancing, feasting, and a blessing from the priest. Teams worked from both banks, passing materials hand to hand, singing to keep time. Even Charles Bramwell, once so removed from village life, labored in the sun with the others, his face alight with a new humility and purpose. The bridge took shape slowly but steadily, each plank and stone a testament to unity. When the final beam was placed, the whole village gathered for a crossing ceremony. Eliza, leading the procession, paused in the middle to tie her old daisy crown to the railings as a symbol of all they had overcome. Rex trotted beside her, head held high, his medal gleaming in the afternoon sun. The moment the bridge opened, families from the other side poured in, bringing gifts, news, and the beginnings of new friendships. There was a sense of celebration, but also a quiet understanding. This was just the next step in a journey that would never truly end. Challenges would come again, as sure as storms and winter, but so would courage, kindness, and the willingness to stand together. That evening, Maple Grove threw a feast in the fields by the river, lanterns strung from tree to tree. Eliza and her friends shared stories by the fire, recalling how far they had come and dreaming aloud of what else was possible. The elders spoke of the days before hope had returned, then raised their glasses to the children who had brought it back. As the fire died down, Eliza sat quietly with Rex, looking out over the bridge, the river, and the fields beyond. She felt a peace she had never known, the certainty that she was part of something enduring, something good. And as the stars shimmered overhead, Rex rested his head in her lap, eyes bright and content. Eliza smiled, whispering a thank you to the nightie, to her village, and above all, to the friend who had taught her that the smallest acts of loyalty and kindness could ripple outward until they changed the world. Summer's arrival brought with it both celebration and a new test for Maple Grove. The bridge had opened new pathways. Goods, ideas, and people flowed between villages as never before. For a time, it seemed as if nothing could shake the peace they had built. Yet in the midst of the season's bounty, an unexpected crisis arose, one that would demand everything Eliza, Rex, and the community had learned about unity, courage, and compassion. It began with a rumor: strange men seen lurking at the edge of neighboring villages, livestock stolen in the night, travelers robbed along the road. Anxiety spread quickly, old fears threatening to resurface. When, one evening, a wagon carrying grain for the sharing store was attacked and a beloved elderly villager went missing, the mood of Maple Grove shifted from celebration to vigilance. The council met in emergency session, debating how best to protect the village and its new allies across the bridge. Some called for closing the bridge, but Eliza stood and spoke with quiet resolve. We built that bridge so no one would stand alone. If we shut others out now, we lose everything we fought for. We must help, not hide. Her words galvanized the village. Charles Bramwell, now among the first to offer aid, organized patrols with other former landowners. The constable worked closely with neighboring communities to coordinate watch schedules and share information. Even the youngest children contributed, delivering messages, watching for strangers, or bringing food to those standing guard. Rex, sensing the tension, became more vigilant than ever. He patrolled the perimeter of the village each night, his keen nose and sharp ears alert for any sign of danger. On more than one occasion, his warning bark sent would-be thieves running. The villagers slept easier knowing Rex watched over them. Then, one night, as a storm brewed on the horizon, Rex failed to return from his rounds. Eliza waited anxiously, her heart pounding as thunder rolled and lightning flashed. Finally, as the rain began to fall in heavy sheets, there was a commotion at the edge of the village, a cluster of voices and lanterns flickering in the darkness. Rex burst through the crowd, muddy and limping but alive. Behind him came the missing elderly villager, bruised but safe. Rex had tracked the kidnappers to a ruined shed outside the neighboring town, raised the alarm, and refused to leave until help arrived. Thanks to his persistence, the villains had been caught and the old woman rescued. The relief was overwhelming. The entire village poured into the square despite the rain, cheering and embracing each other. Eliza knelt beside Rex, tears streaming down her cheeks as she hugged him tight. "You saved her, just like you saved me," she whispered. "You're the bravest soul I know." The next day, the story spread even farther than before. Messages of thanks arrived from every direction, and Maple Grove's example inspired villages across the valley to strengthen their bonds, to share more, and to defend one another. That evening, A great feast was held beneath the lantern-lit trees. The elders spoke, recalling the journey from fear and division to unity and courage. Charles Bramwell, moved by the night's events, stood and offered a toast. Let us always remember that a community is only as strong as its kindness, and that the bravest among us might walk on 4 legs. When it came time to honor Rex, the children gathered round and presented him with a new medal, a simple silver circle engraved with the words, "Guardian of us all." The villagers cheered as Eliza fastened it to his collar, her heart full of pride. As the stars emerged, Eliza looked out over her village, at the bridge, the fields, and the faces of people she loved. She saw not just the victory over one night's danger, but the triumph of a community that had learned together to turn hardship into hope and fear into action. In that moment, as Rex rested his head in her lap and the fireflies danced above the grass, Eliza understood that their story would never really end. There would always be new challenges, new seasons of trial and joy, but Maple Grove was ready. They were family, not by birth but by choice, a choice sealed by every act of courage and every kindness that followed, and somewhere beyond the dark horizon, where the wild world waited, a single brave dog's bark carried the promise that no one would ever face it alone. As the last echoes of the summer feast faded into the gentle hush of night, Maple Grove's fields glowed with lanterns, laughter, and a peace hard won. Eliza sat with Rex by the bridge, watching the moon shimmer on the water. The world seemed both larger and kinder now, a tapestry woven from hardship, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of community. The days that followed were marked by gratitude and reflection. The rescued villager, once frail and fearful, regained her strength, surrounded by neighbors who had become family. Rex, now proudly bearing 2 medals, was celebrated wherever he went. Children raced to greet him, and even the most stoic elders knelt to stroke his fur, grateful for all he had done. Life resumed its rhythm, but something had shifted deep within the heart of Maple Grove. The bridge was no longer just a crossing. It was a living symbol of the values the village now held sacred: openness, trust, and the certainty that even the smallest kindness could ripple outward to touch lives far beyond their own. The council continued to meet, but the work was lighter now, imbued with a spirit of optimism. Plans were made to expand the gardens, to start a library, and to launch a fund for villages elsewhere that had not yet found their courage. Charles Bramwell, changed by experience and humbled by forgiveness, became a mentor to the younger farmers, teaching what he knew, but always listening for the wisdom of others. In his transformation, the community found a quiet reminder that even the hardest hearts could change. Eliza's role grew too. She was asked to speak at the region's schools, sharing her story not as a victim, but as a leader, a friend, and a symbol of what courage and compassion could achieve. With Rex always at her side, she taught children that no act of kindness is wasted, and that no one is ever truly alone as long as there is someone willing to stand up for what is right. Yet, for all the progress, Maple Grove remained humble. Each season brought new challenges: floods in the spring, illness in the fall, the hard work of harvest, and the quiet aches of loss. But now, these trials were met not with despair, but with hands joined and hearts open. One autumn evening, as the leaves turned golden red, the village gathered for the day of courage and kindness. Lanterns floated down the river, each carrying a wish for the future. Eliza spoke from the bridge, her words simple but strong. We are all capable of bravery, not just in grand moments, but in small acts, every day. When we choose kindness, we choose hope. When we stand together, we become a family. As she finished, the crowd erupted in applause, and Rex barked, a sound that echoed with the promise of loyalty and love. When the last lantern vanished down the river, Eliza stood with Rex beneath the stars, thinking back to the night she had been tied to the tree, frightened and alone. The pain of that memory had not vanished, but it had been transformed. It was now a source of strength, a reminder that darkness can give way to light, and that the courage to reach out, to help, to forgive, can remake a world. In the years that followed, Maple Grove's legend spread far and wide. Villages rebuilt, strangers became friends, and children everywhere grew up knowing that true wealth was measured not in coins, but in compassion and trust. The old oak tree, once a symbol of cruelty, became a gathering place for celebrations and vows, a living testament to the journey from fear to hope. Eliza grew into a woman admired and beloved by all, her story told and retold as inspiration for new generations. And Rex, faithful to the end, was remembered not just as a hero, but as a friend who taught a village how to love. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true tales of courage, hope, and the bonds that change lives. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever witnessed an act of loyalty or kindness that changed everything? And if you want to hear more, check out our next story, where you'll discover how a single act of bravery set a community on the path to healing. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Together, let's keep building bridges, standing up for one another, and believing in the power of kindness, one story, one day, one heart at a time.